Hello and welcome to season 2 of the Change Troubleshooter podcast. And today we're going to talk about can we be sustainable with data or without it? And today joining me to look at that question is Federico, Anders and Alan. And Federico is a master's student studying environmental sustainability and green technology at Kiel University. Anders is the founder of PLM Concept and co-author of the book Business DNA versus Digitalization and IT. And Alan is Director of Customer Engagements at EQ Technologic, a digitalization and data as a service business. Welcome, all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to roll straight into this with such an interesting point that, by 2040, storing digital data is set to create 14% of the world's emissions, around the same proportion as the US does today. When I read this, it absolutely blew my mind. I had no idea that in terms of emissions, the digital data we were storing was creating so much of a problem. What about you three? Did you know?
Yeah. So no, I didn't actually know this. It seems quite high, but at the same time, it says here only half the world's population is contributing to that. The first thing that I would think after reading this is it makes sense because we haven't really had to limit ourselves in terms of how much data we're storing or the computing capacity. There's the Moore's law, which kind of states that computing capacity has doubled every 18 months, 2 years, pretty much since the 60s. So we've just kind of created more powerful computers which can run more sophisticated software and storing even more data. But now we're reaching a bit of a plateau, so we'll definitely need to rethink how much we're using.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've got a view on this. I work with a lot of organizations. I just pick one out at random, Formula One, for example. If you think about the amount of computing power they have to put into aerodynamic analysis, things like CFD, computational fluid dynamics, those analysis alone, the server banks that they need to actually power those long-running analysis are probably consume enough power in terms of the power supplies and everything else for the server banks, but also the cooling and everything that goes with it. That power is probably equivalent of powering a small village, as an example, and that's just one small microcosm. So you think about all the analysis alone that goes on in businesses around the world today that are designing and manufacturing product. It's not surprising that it's that type of demand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say that I'm a bit surprised about the size of this number. I think it's a clear indicator to us that we have to consolidate and merge the data that we already have and bring it together and utilize that instead of generating even more data.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't think about it, do we, at the moment? We even in our personal lives, we collect so many things. We don't delete emails, we don't delete photographs, we don't delete videos, and so many of these get sent around everywhere because we just don't really think about where they're stored. And data centers need both heat and cooling. And there's a pretty interesting article about the amount of data centers that are now springing up in Iceland because there's natural sources of heat and cooling, but it's going to completely change the carbon footprint of a country like Iceland just for data centers alone. So yet again, we're creating problems that we really should be giving some thought around, and that really is shown here that the idea now that we should be thinking about data quality, not quantity, and data that can drive transformational change is really important. And again, when we did some research on this, there are some really cool things that are appearing now. Accenture have done a report on the human impact of data literacy, and it really, they've taken time to analyse how people think about data in the workplace, whether it interests them, how they use data to make decisions. It's a fantastic report, and I will put all the sources of these documents in the podcast notes so everyone can access them. One of the interesting things there that I'm sure we can all relate to is that 36% of people would find an alternative method to complete a task without using data if they could. And 14% of people would avoid the task entirely if they had to use data, which I think sometimes I put myself in that category. And then there are companies like Trace who, this is something really new. It's going to give transparency for sustainable economies, and the questions that keep getting asked now: how sustainable is a company really when you take into account its global supply chains? And you know, there's a big conversation that goes on in the UK all the time that the UK is not an industrial country anymore, hasn't been for some time. It has outsourced all its industrial capacity. So the true carbon footprint of the UK can actually be found globally. And as a country, we should be more responsible in actually identifying and taking responsibility for that. And Trace seem to be doing that at a company level. And so it gets us closer, I guess, to that. So before I go on to the save the planet side of big data, what do you think about this kind of data that's coming together now that will challenge us and get us to think about the transformational change?
It's, yeah, good observations there, and I think there's a sort of slight contradiction actually in this the whole thing about people finding alternate methods. Yeah, I do get that, and I think this is about people probably not seeking out the correct data is where I see a lot of challenges. Many organizations and perhaps people in general are quite happy to consume whatever's there, but also then create their own slant on it. And we see this with the proliferation of things like the world being dominated with information streaming through mobile phones, with businesses running lots of things from Excel spreadsheets and otherwise. They want fast data. They don't want to work for it. And the problem I think that exists today is with the manifestation of data over so many years now, over many, many decades, the truth lies in things that are very hard to get to at times. Yeah. And I think it's really, it's a key aspect of anything that we do now is to actually surface the real data and not what is actually easy to get in the first place. And I think that's where we can actually get better decisions then made in development of products or in everyday life, if we can actually get to that information that's hidden behind the data.
Yeah.
And I think also, I mean, if you think about it from a sustainability, we're talking about data in terms of sustainability, but even if you think about data about the state of our planet today, I mean, there's organizations like planet.com, for example, that create very powerful visualizations that are real true representations of the data that shows what's actually happening to our planet. They're showing real time the deforestation. I know Federico actually talking to Fed, he's got great views on CO2 and that, I think, which we'll see later. But this sort of rate of deforestation and the fires that are being lit around the planet are all now available in data. So it's surfacing the right type of information is critical.
Absolutely. And as we've got in the right hand side there, is big data going to save our planet? And for those people who might not know, big data is just a term for gathering lots of data from lots of places, isn't it? It's not a different kind of data. I suppose it's explained there in the box that says, how can big data help our environment? Gathering the data, connecting the dots from different sources. I mean, that is the premise behind big data, isn't it?
Bit of a buzzword, big data, but definitely it makes it sound a lot better than a bunch of servers running in the back room where nobody knows where it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Anders, do you want to say something before we?
Yeah, it's again a question about gathering the data into a bigger view, and I think we can definitely reduce the amount of data by doing that in a clever way. It's not just about the amount of data, but it's a question about gathering the clever data and build information on top of that. Absolutely. I think that can bring us in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah. And Federico, this is where we started, isn't it? From a sustainability picture. Here, you're going to share with us how we even know we're in a situation that needs to change.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of why, I mean, data is the reason why we're even having this conversation now. Kind of, we've only through kind of collecting the right amount, not the right amount, but asking the right questions and recording the right data, do we know that we need to kind of have this conversation about reducing the amount of data that we need in our business or our organization. Otherwise, we'll be contributing to that kind of 14% emissions by 2040 if we don't make those right decisions. But yeah, here this is probably a good one to start with. It's kind of this shows since 1850s or so the kind of temperature, and what you need to remember is a third, or maybe even a half of all CO2 has been released in the last 30 years. So we don't see much change in the temperature until the last 30, 40 years. And kind of, yeah, here we end in 2017, nearly the hottest year on record. Obviously, since 2017, we've had even hotter years still. But we've kind of been tracking this quite carefully since 1959 in Hawaii, the actual CO2 in the atmosphere. But even from the scientific perspective, we can measure it over the past hundreds of thousands of years through ice cores, which you see in this other graph. We've never really been above kind of 300-ish parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. And then 1950s, we exceeded that, and now I think this year we're at 415. Yeah, 415 parts per million, kind of
smashing it.
Yeah, yeah, we're definitely succeeding at something, but yeah, always succeeding at the right thing. Yeah, and then the next slide here is a good one on kind of COVID-19 as an experiment. I mean, global warming as an experiment is already one big thing. We're kind of all living inside of this big bubble that we're kind of experimenting the effects of greenhouse gases. But COVID-19 is a great kind of indicator to kind of put into perspective the kind of transformation that we need to look at realizing. This graph just shows a bit of a small blip, but if you could go to the next graphic as well. This one kind of puts it in context. So just for those listening just on the audio, we see nearly a 6% drop in emissions last year in 2020, which sounds like a lot, but actually if you put it in comparison to past drops in emissions, which there aren't that many, to be honest, but the biggest past drop in emissions is just over 2%, and that was the end of the Second World War, as quite a few countries were rebuilding and didn't have their industries working like they did before, and that was only 2%. So it's COVID-19 is a great indicator of what is possible if we kind of take a critical look at what's important and how do we go about doing that.
I think the shocking thing that I think when I see these figures is that I hate COVID life. And through this life that I now hate, there's only been a 6% drop and we need to do more than that. So it really makes me think that we need to be much more creative, because if we want a life that we think is the life we should be living without generating the emissions, this is more about a real change in what we're doing, rather than thinking that stop doing a few things is going to make a difference, because we've had to stop doing an awful lot of stuff, and it's made it, like you said, it's made a significant difference, but it's not as much as we need to, and we all hate it. So in all honesty, really, when we're allowed to live a life again that we would choose to live, we're going to see probably a spike, and we need to move away from that, don't we? So we need to be using this data that exists today to be saying, actually, just telling people to stop doing a few things isn't going to take us where we need to be. We need to be using the data to start looking at some real transformational change.
Yeah, the drop that we do need is about between 7 and 8% year on year. So really, we need to take kind of a very long-term view on this and kind of come up with a strategy on how to kind of keep it moving down, either in one fell swoop quite drastically, if we can reduce our data centers impact by 50% by realizing we don't need it, or we only need a very small percentage of it. That's great. Or we can kind of chip away at it at that 7 to 8% every year.
I know, and it would just be amazing to think that something that we don't really hear talked about very much, the amount of data we're creating, which leads on to the data centers that hold that data being an emissions problem. But actually, this could be something that, if we think about it now, something that people feel is an issue anyway, definitely in their working lives, and by taking some action, some positive action now in a change strategy, we could actually reap several benefits, which would just be amazing.
Definitely.
So to make an observation on that, actually, Nina, is if you actually look at the drop that Federico articulated there, and you would be forgiven for thinking that was associated to the world stopping commercial air travel and stopping traveling in their vehicles and everything else, and certainly in the first sort of global lockdowns, you just saw practically no air traffic, no nothing. But actually, the amount of impact that actually has, it just goes to show things like other facilities and activities that are burning fuel still have so much impact in us, and actually that whole sort of global transformation dropping off a cliff only actually made quite a small impact still. So there's so much more for us to do.
I know, it's really quite shocking, isn't it?
Absolutely.
One point I could add for a bit of context is that in the first lockdown, kind of March time, February time 2020, we did actually see an emissions drop of over 15%, almost up to 20%. So it's kind of, we can have the massive transformation we need, except averaged over the year, it kind of averages out about 6. So it's kind of, we found a very good way to bounce back from how to live in lockdown. But
Yeah, it is. Well, it is an amazing point that's well talked about at the moment, that the lockdowns 2 and 3 have been nowhere near lockdown 1. Lockdown 1 was the thing that really brought everything to a stop, didn't it? But
exactly. I think there are 2 things missing in lockdown 2 and 3, and that's the lock bit and the down bit. I don't think those seem to exist.
So to bring this now big thinking into our business world, we all talk about the sustainable digital thread a lot, and There's another podcast done with Ross Caddens from Siemens about how to achieve a sustainable digital thread. And this slide is also in that deck, because what we're talking about here now is even the big change that's going on within most organizations, where the environmental, social and governance reporting is being more heavily linked to all 17 sustainable development goals. So not just looking at climate change, but all 17 sustainable goals, which are very broad, and then bringing that into whether you're a product company or a service company, the life cycle then that exists in getting that product and service out in the most sustainable way. And just the headlines there are, you know, we're always looking at a problem statement, sustainable design, life cycle analysis, accountability throughout the whole supply chain, and reporting and governance. And we know that just in those 5 headlines themselves, the amount of data created under that magnifying glass there is immense, immense. And now on top of that, you have all the ways that you get external recognition for what you're doing. So all the social media, the likes, dislike, the commentary, that all exists in a parallel world, looking at what you're doing. And then the reporting that goes on internally to make sure that you continue with stakeholder investments and keep the business going in that way. So just what we're talking about there is an enormous data picture, isn't it?
It is. It really takes a lot to bring it all together. It's though important that that there's a common focus in order to utilize the data, no matter if you're one side of a company compared to the other side. There's a habit of creating your own data, because then you know what exactly you should expect from the file that you open, and you can do whatever you want. But that generates a number of copies depending on where you are located in the factory.
Yeah, and this, we go on to some information that's taken from your book, Anders, where you really researched this, and talk us through your findings.
Yeah, the finding and observations that we have written about in the book is the fact that there's in most organizations there's and now we are in the manufacturing company context. There's significant silos or walls between the different departments, which means that the cooperation between the departments can be better, and the focus towards the product and the modules in the product portfolio could definitely be a target for an organization. There's a trend that the organizations and the departments of the organizations are prioritized high. So there's definitely room for improvement here, and that goes also for the data.
And this, and for those of you again listening on audio, there's a slide up that shows a very traditional route of sales and marketing, research and development, design, manufacturing and engineering, logistics, production, service, repair. And the problem stems from that still very traditional linear approach being in existence in many of the organizations that exist.
Correct.
Here we see 5 silos, and each silo would have a copy of the same data.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if they even have the same picture of the organization.
And so, Anders, you talk about a brick wall here.
Yeah, and the idea with this illustration was to take it to the next level and actually illustrate what is inside the product specification if you have a more end-to-end perspective on that specification. If you do it this way, then the usage of the information can be more department independent, and that could lead to a higher reuse of data. It will of course reduce the amount of data, but it will also speed up the work in at the company, and you could gain a faster time to market for your products simply by reusing the information and the data that is generated. You could turn it into a more parallel way of working compared to the serial way of working with all the silos.
This is tying into what we are hearing a lot about now, moving from a linear to a circular way of working, but we don't specifically target data as one of the areas where you can make significant impact here. But what you're talking about, Anders, is the 3 R's, aren't you? Reduction in data, reuse of data, recycle data. And exactly. As a result of doing those things and moving this traditional linear approach into a more circular approach, then your ability to reduce and use the data that you really need to use is enormous. And the sustainability impact of that is equally enormous.
Yeah, that's right. There's a direct contribution I see there. But also, if you would like to develop your product in a sustainable way, then you have a much higher possibility if you collaborate and utilize the same data, because then you would have all the aspects of the product into consideration when you are optimizing and calculating the impact.
And so this is a graphic that takes the product information model all the way through ideation, realization, utilization, and this is where you think where people could end up quite easily.
Yeah, they could definitely end up there. I think there's still a way to go from many organizations, because we have this very strong tradition and history of being in the silos that we saw on the other slide. It's one of the big hassles, I think, to move away from that. But it is necessary that we have a more product and module oriented focus, and then dealing with the different aspects of the products and the modules, and then actually build a complete specification. And we have called it a product information model in the book, which actually covers all the aspects in the life cycle of the product. So it is covered. It's considered when you introduce the product, when you change the product. So we have a more comprehensive picture of what we actually do, and that is important for many areas like cost, but definitely also for sustainability.
So Alan, when you're looking at providing data as a service, how would that tie into what Anders is saying here? I mean, well, before we jump into that, the that's still siloed linear working, how much of that do you still see out there?
I think, Nina, most companies have got aspirations. They've got digitalization strategies. They've got chief digitalization and information officers now that they're talking the talk. The ability to realize that is challenged for a number of reasons. I mean, what Anders explains here is a typical life cycle of someone who will design, manufacture, and support a product, and lots of organizations have got very good solutions in place to then think about those sort of environmental impacts that product evolution and running products have. They're somewhat hampered because unfortunately organizations have evolved over so long, and they're not dealing with a nice greenfield situation that everything sits in 2 or 3 systems like a PLM and a resource planning and perhaps some other sort of support type solution. Information is scattered around the place, and they have legacy processes, they have certified standards that they have to operate to in things like aviation as an example. So it's very hard to actually unpick that nest of data, and but organizations are realizing that there was a point made earlier on about Anders, you made this point about people personalizing information and getting their own copy, if you like. That is a trend that we see an awful lot of. The proliferation of data in things like Excel spreadsheets and databases and otherwise, they may be very useful for somebody slicing information in the way they want to consume, but in the end they become a replica. They add to the big pile of data that some server somewhere is taking care of, and just cause problems on both an environmental front and in getting the right information, which leads to, unfortunately, the proliferation of more data.
Yeah, and Federico, you will be studying this the same that I did recently. This is actually the big problem we've got to solve, because everybody keeps saying, oh well, we've got all these structures, we've got these organizations that go back to the industrial age, and they've not really changed much since then. But actually, to cope with the targets that we need to hit, we absolutely need a rewire. These aren't small changes, are they? This is different thinking. It's to now just, okay, we accept this is going to be hard, but we're out of time now for the small tweaks. This has to be something significant.
Most definitely. The COVID-19 is a good kind of brick wall that people have physically hit now. Similar to Andrew's slide, it's kind of people needed to stop and look at how they're running things, and I think that was in many respects needed. And I think even without it, we need that kind of overarching strategy, I'd say, on how we're recording our data. Do we need it all? What's key? And are we kind of collecting it and utilizing it in the way that we should? Otherwise, we will have 3 copies of it, and they'll all be out of date. But all 3 people holding that data will be arguing why their data is correct, even though they're all out of date. Yeah.
And this is another major problem, because this information dates so quickly, doesn't it? Actually, I guess we have both ends of the scale here. We have information that dates very quickly because of the way that the world is changing, and digitalization itself has brought in significant change. But then we've got the information that has been around forever. I had a conversation with somebody at Rolls-Royce recently, and they were saying that the aviation laws mean that they have to keep relevant all the records of any engine, any jet engine that's been produced. And in this particular case, Rolls-Royce have never discontinued a jet engine, because there's still very old engines, Spitfires and things, that people have restored and keep going. So Rolls-Royce as a company have to keep that information valid. So you've got situations like that where very old data has to be kept relevant, accessible, and on file. And then you've got new data that is coming in, which I think we probably don't care about as much, because we just don't think about it. And Anders, in your slide here, where you've got, if we go clockwise, business strategy, digitalization strategy, solution area, and key performance indicators, what were your observations on how this needed to come together?
Yeah, I think this. I know this slide is illustrating the need for having a top-down approach for certain vital areas for them to work. So the intention with this slide here is to illustrate that we need to add these requirements like sustainability, digital threats, and stuff like that in as business strategies in order to achieve them. So they will by natural be part of the digital strategy, the solution area, and in the end the key performance indicators. Otherwise, if not, then they will simply be overlooked or overrun by something else with higher importance. That's how it is. So so with this, it is actually sort of an X matrix how you actually link the different strategies. So they will end up in being a key performance indicators targeting the right strategy. That's really important for the business to do so.
And here you're really saying that it's that business strategy end that needs to make sure it's leading with all the things as one strategy. So typically what we've seen until very recently for some organizations is an ESG report or any sustainability report or even any digitalization strategy. They're all held separately. We have a business strategy that is still really fundamentally weighted in how that business is going to generate profit, still fundamentally weighted there. And the other elements we're seeing as, of course, part of the business strategy, but we'd still see them as separate reports. And it's only a few companies more recently, companies like Unilever, have started to say there will be no separate ESG reporting, there will be no separate sustainability report from us. It is one business report, and these things are so fundamental to our business now. Our business is wired to allow us to report on this because that's our business, and that's the change that we need to see, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You could say that if you set up a key performance indicator, then you will, in most cases, get what you're asking for. And if you set it at the wrong level, then you will get the wrong result because the the organizations will optimize as much as possible, and that will also happen in the departments. So if the key performance indicators are put at the wrong level, then you will get the wrong result. So
yeah, and some of this is about, there is just too much data, isn't there? I mean, I think all of us have had personal experiences of this. Even in my last client, we tried to talk a lot about putting in a clear data strategy. And the conversations really, I mean, those two images we got here, we've got a woman who just has a hand over her face, which could have been me any day, and a guy that's got both hands on his head in despair, and across the top it says, when data is everywhere, where do you start? And I think it can feel so paralyzing that actually companies feel that they can't do anything at all. So when you're trying to provide this as a service, Alan, how do you convince them that there is a way out of this?
Well, they're brilliant images, Nina, and you know, we talked earlier on about the sort of the demands from like a single Formula One team in terms of their super compute. But if you actually look at other things, just anecdotal evidence that's out there, I think there is something, I don't know, some survey that was done in 2019 that there was something like 4 or just shy of 500,000 tweets a minute going around the planet. So you just think about, people just think actually generating data is free, it's got no impact, but that's stored somewhere. So you think about that, and then I think in terms of Google's stats very recently, they were putting something around about 3.5 billion searches a minute as well, that have all got computing power associated to it. But then if you then bring that down into at an organizational level, so back to our sustainability and data and sustainability in building products and looking after products for manufacturers, they have their own microcosm of all of that, all this input going into making data available to manufacture products. The challenges that we see is exactly as these pictures here. What information do you work from? And the whole idea that everything is in a life cycle management. I mean, you mentioned, for example, that you'd spoken to Ross Caddens of Siemens Industry Software. They're making all sorts of attempts to sort of consolidate that whole product life cycle piece. The reality, as we've mentioned earlier in the call, is that data is in so many other places. Not everything is in that greenfield state. So we have to really work with organizations to start to surface that. And we have all sorts of thoughts about this. Is, can we aggregate information from those sources? Can you work in a federated manner to lift information up and really bring that the right knowledge? And that we have a path that, I've got data's everywhere. How do I turn that data into information? And then from that information, how can I then execute the knowledge? You're having fun with that, Sly.
I didn't take the animation out, did I?
No, do you want to pause it and take the animation?
Yeah, so on this slide that keeps disappearing on me is an image of the EQ digital backbone, and it's a tool that allows data to be pulled from so many different sources now, which is the real picture that exists in most organizations.
Yeah.
So, once upon a time, not once upon a time, actually still in lots of conversations, people still say, okay, we need to consolidate our data. We need to have a data warehouse. And yeah. I don't know about you three, but at the point that a data warehouse is mentioned, my heart sinks always.
So let me jump into that one, because this is a topic that we get into an awful lot. And data warehouses, lakes, whatever else, have absolutely got their place. But this is with the advent of things like streaming data now, IoT. So industrial IoT, so things coming from the shop floor, that is all data that is non-transient. It's time series. Okay, that is perfect information to reside in a data lake. And this is a great step forward, actually. What you have to do is bring context to that data by merging it with your enterprise data, so you know what that was actually related to. Mm-hmm. We get worried when we see other types of transient data, or to Anders' point earlier on, the copied data. And there is this hunger, it appears, and I rightly or wrongly would relate this to a bit of a new millennial bug, not millennium bug, but millennial bug. We've got a new breed of people now that are data wranglers, data scientists. I need to get in amongst the data. But that seems to have got associated to this concept of pumping stuff into the cloud so we can do data science on it. Organizations, particularly in the industries that we get exposed into, have got all sorts of other challenges. Things like export control, ensuring that only the right people see the right data. Exposing the wrong type of data is a different type of compliance problem to those organizations. They could end up in court for exposing military data to some guy in the street. So that whole thought process where people are investing in tools like, I don't know, PLM from Siemens as an example, they invest huge amounts of money in creating data models, security models, and otherwise to protect that data and that intellectual property. When we see this trend now of putting transient data or controlled data into data lakes, that is a real worry. It's a big concern. And one of the key aspects of that is actually the configuration control. And I'll just take you on a little sort of a journey here on something that we've seen in so many customers worldwide. And that's actually to do with inventory and how much product people are storing in their facilities. And if we think about the manufacture or the creation of a part, we've got things like the design and the analysis, if you like, the initial digital side of things nowadays. But have people really thought about, well, where's that data going and how much power and how many resources are being consumed just to create that data in the first place?
Yeah.
And then they replicate it, that's even more. So going back to the number of tweets in the day, if we then sort of correlate that to the amount of times people duplicate things to get their copies to make their life easier, every time we tap in something on a phone, every time we tap a keyboard, we're putting data somewhere. That's not free. That's got a cost associated to it. It's got an environmental impact to it as well. But then correlate that out to what happens to that design once you've done it. You go into supercompute analysis to make sure that product's all fine. That's burning enough for a small village that we've spoken about as an example. When you then look at that further, and you actually think about, well, it was really easy to create a part. You know, it was ever so easy nowadays. I can just tap in my design, do the analysis, and my part appears. Then I can send it off to manufacture. Where's the consideration whether that exists or whether something could be reused? And seeing that, seeing organizations taking that into mind, and I've worked with a lot of really forward-thinking organizations there. How do I reconcile my parts? JCB is a great example. I've worked with the colleagues there, and certainly our team have worked with the colleagues there to look at that critically. How can we reduce the number of parts, home in on the ones that have got the highest quality, and where there may be possible duplication that they can reduce? That impacts inventory, it impacts storage. I mean, I've lost count of the numbers of organizations that I've spoken to that said, I've got all that stuff in the stores there, and most of it I can't use. And that goes back to that configuration control topic I brought up. Is you haven't got the right configuration control, all the things that you've actually designed, you're going to manufacture and make spares for. The fact that some of them haven't been put together and put onto a product is lost in the data.
Yeah.
So that's surfacing that data, aggregating that information, and turning that information into knowledge to then say, these are the things I need to make. And these are the things I don't need to make, but I need to have designs just in case. Then we're in a better place. There'll be less facilities that need to be built. There'll be less manufacturing, there'll be less machine tools, there'll be less tooling, all that type of thing that goes with the part can actually be reduced. And then if you actually then take that into the way that we operate nowadays, that lots of manufacturers actually have third parties that make their parts, they're actually probably multi-supplier. So each one of these suppliers are having to tool up to make this thing. And they're probably making things that are never going to be used. So then you think about, what about all the scrap? What about all the reworks, pushing things back into their raw materials, or even just pushing them into landfill because they can't be used?
Yeah.
It's just the insight as to what's going on there is quite staggering when you open the box. People do not realize what's actually happening in nearly every organization in the planet that are making things. So I think so that's where I think we can really use this ability to surface the information. I mean, the slide that wanted to disappear all the time is really where we start talking to people now to say, just pulling things into a lake or a bucket is not what you need to do. You need to get into where the data is, the source is, understand how your products come together, which is over a massive systems and legacy data and legacy systems, not just one or two, and then really give you that ability to make the right decision really quick. And we have a term, you know, am I going to make a better decision quicker, Or because I've put all my data into one bucket because I want fast data, am I now going to make a really fast decision that is terrible? You know, am I making worse decisions even faster?
Yeah.
So it's changing the mindsets and coming away from these things, thinking I can just push all my stuff into a cloud, run a little sort of really quick visualization on it, and I get an answer. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the wrong answer.
But it's and I think for new companies that start today, that are starting today, they have such an advantage against heritage organizations who probably have such a wealth. I mean, you know, we most of us are of the age where we remember drawings being, you know, put into a digitalized form. I mean, that's still going. I mean, remember it. I mean, in a lot of organizations, it's still happening. I don't even know what I'm saying there. It's still happening, that we are still trying to digitalize paper drawings and things that even came before that. So what can we do to give the listeners something that we can take away in this? I mean, I hope that everyone's taken away from this conversation, even so far, that this is a huge area of opportunity, not just to save the planet in terms of what we can do for our sustainability footprint, but it's a huge cost-saving opportunity. And when organizations are struggling so much, and that, again, awful term, the low-hanging fruit is gone. Actually, the low-hanging fruit is in here. It's just that normally it's hidden in such a huge pile of data that people feel too overwhelmed to take that on. And so what we're saying, the three actions we want everyone to take away today. Number one, identify what data is the business asset. And it sounds so easy, and actually it is easy. And in a previous company I worked with, I did suggest at one meeting that we just deleted all the data, because the people who worked on the products were already keeping their own records of data. So all the information we actually needed could have very easily been put back into the system, rather than some wild concept that they could clean it, which, you know, for anybody thinking about data cleaning at the moment, it's such a unrewarding piece of work. To look at something more creative, another creative way of identifying your business asset, we would really recommend that. And then something that we don't talk about much is when we talk about product life cycles, is that data has a life cycle. So it's really easy actually to map a data life cycle. And we've all discussed it through this conversation today, that data is important in different ways at different points of the life cycle. So mapping inputs and outputs, and I think, Alan, it was you that said it, the point where data turns into information, and when you need to use it in another context, all that is really important. And be clear about when data needs to turn into decision making and how. We have endless conversations when it comes to data about BI tools, reporting and analytics tools, as if that tool is going to make all the difference, but actually it's actions 1 and 2 that make number 3 the agile process that it's meant to be. And I'm sure that the 3 of you have some experiences on this. So why don't we end the podcast by just going around and sharing something that the listeners can take away? I'm scared of now picking on someone.
If I should start this time. This is a very common scenario. I think one of the challenges is actually to identify. So if we start with the first point, mapping the data together in order to find out what it's all about, how it's related, how is turned into a business asset. That gives a much better picture of what can be deleted and what should be kept. With regards to the life cycle, it's important that you have a maturity for your product, but also for the belonging data, because then you have the ability to do certain actions to maturity X, Y, Z. You have an idea what we're talking about. It's about seeing what's where the data are in the life cycle, and if that's unclear, then it can be very difficult to manage.
Yeah, one thing I would leave listeners with is pausing and kind of making a comprehensive strategy around like the data lifecycle is really quite important. And something a colleague of ours was doing, discovered that you could almost say that the unscrupulous nature of collecting data has led to the same actions in the physical world. What I mean by that is they have the ability to track where all their spare parts have gone digitally, but they never asked, do we need 100 million pounds worth of stock sitting in a warehouse not doing anything? But we can track it, so we're doing that, and it's fine. It's just not the physical kind of reality of that data is quite not only costly, but it's unsustainable. Why do you have all of these prefabricated parts, which could very well just be in an actual assembly or something like that? So if you really need to take a kind of a holistic view on what your data is supposed to be achieving for the business.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, really, if I pick the end item that you've got there, Nina, the point 3, we see a lot of people that are quite obsessed by visualization of information, of data. A visualization is nothing, and a visualization is certainly not business intelligence. If you can't relate that to an endpoint, to an action point, so that insight that you get leads to an action and drives you to that point of action, it's just another red, amber, green chart on a wall somewhere. And I've lost count of the amounts of organizations where I've walked into places and seen charts all over the wall with red, amber, green, and say, okay, what does this nice visualization tell you? Oh, that tells me that that item's late. Okay, right. And what do I need now to do with it? Well, that's just telling me it's late. Well, where do I go now to do something? Oh, you have to go and talk to such and such. Okay. Then you look at the next red chart, and what does that red mean? Oh, that means that's not started. So going back to the guy who had his hands in his head, or the lady that was just looking like she'd lost the will, that's exactly what people are faced with today. So it's interpretation of what's in front of you is a big problem. So if actually sending people to the action point and delivering what we'd refer to as actionable insight that takes you back to the system of record, so to Anders' point, don't make silos of copied data. If it's linked to the system of record, you can actually get back to the action point, and those solutions exist today. And I think if we can help people get to that understanding, and then that whole thing about then your data turns into information, becomes knowledge, you then get the opportunity to make meaningful change in the organization. And really that addresses the other points. You know, the data does then become a business asset that can work for you, not actually be a threat to you as it appears to be at the moment. So if we make that meaningful change, that gives a better working environment for people. It's better for the environment because we're not just creating this proliferation. And quite honestly, businesses will make more margin. So we'll win. It's not that hard.
Yeah, it's been fascinating digging into this topic in this way and taking the sustainability angle as a lead. I've never done it before, and I'm really glad that I did, and I'm really glad to have shared it with the three of you. I think the experiences shared today will be really helpful for the listeners, and everybody's details will be in the podcast notes. So if you want to continue the conversation with Anders, Alan, or Frederico, then feel free to do so, because I think this is such an important topic. And as we started with that first slide, this situation is only going to get worse. So as we're battling to try and reduce these emissions and make sure that our carbon footprint is smarter going forward, this is something that we need to change our habits of now and could make a significant difference. So thanks so much, all three of you, for joining me today. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great.